Beloved by Toni Morrison, a seminal work of 20th century literature, and a book which was instrumental in netting its author the Nobel Prize. Now, Toni Morrison is a big name in the world of books, although one with which I actually had had no prior experience. But knowing that this was more or less considered to be her magnum opus, I decided to go for the watermark. And you know what? Beloved is an excellent book. It is also a very painful book, one which is really steeped in a sense of sorrow, although a greatly affecting work, and one which accomplished its goals, I believe, with remarkable aplomb. So, what is the story of Beloved about? Well, it is set sometime after the American Civil War and concerns the life of a black, formerly enslaved woman named Sethe. She lives on the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio, with her daughter Denver, and they live a rather isolated existence because they are shunned by the rest of their community due to the fact both that their house is haunted, as well as due to something that Sethe did in her past, which alienated her from her neighbors. And they live this kind of just, pretty humdrum existence living in a haunted house because this is actually a ghost story, although that's not really the point of it. But they live in this house which is inhabited with the presence of something until one day a man, an also formerly enslaved black man named Paul D shows up at Sethe's doorstep and proceeds to kind of strike up a romance with her because they know each other from the past and they have a lot of overlap in their experiences, so they kind of hit it off. And this um, leads to him kind of exercising whatever spirit resides within Sethe's house. And things seem to be looking up. Things seem to be improving. Sethe has a man now. She has someone to love. And they kind of get out a little bit more until one day they come home to find a young woman uh, of mysterious origin sitting on their step or stoop or whatever at their house, who calls herself Beloved, which just so happens to be the only word that was inscribed upon the tombstone of one of Sethe's children, whom she killed. And this is the act that set her at odds with the rest of her community. And this new woman named Beloved proceeds to move into their house and cause a rift between her and Paul, and a lot of other things begin to kind of spiral out of control a little bit in the presence of this new guest. And that's kind of all I want to say on the plot, because this really is not a plot driven book. This is much more driven by character. It's a very slow burn of a read, but like I said, it's really excellently done. So this is a book that tackles the issue of American slavery head on and much more penetratively than a lot of other books have ever done. Maybe this is the most kind of just intense scrutiny of the American slave trade and what it did to the people who were victims of it and the lasting effects that it had on their psyches. Because this book kind of works on both a literal and a metaphorical level. It is actually a ghost story, although, as I said, that's not really the point of it, and it kind of just acts as a metaphor of the past coming back to haunt the people in the present. So, the central instance around which this story is built is Sethe's murder of her daughter, who is only ever referred to as Beloved because that was the name that was carved on her tombstone, all she could get carved on her tombstone. And this is also inspired by a real life woman, former slave, who uh, did the same thing, murdered her own children. But it is the reasons why these people murdered their own kids, which is what the story really hinges upon. And that is, Sethi kills her daughter because she is about to be caught by a slave catcher and be re-enslaved after having escaped, and she will not let her kids be put through what she has been put through. This causes friction between obviously her and the rest of her community, but also between her and Paul, and kind of disrupts their burgeoning romance because he is disturbed by the fact that she could do something like that. But to her, it was perfectly natural, and it was the most justified thing she could have done because, as the book makes explicitly clear, the horrors of of American slavery far outweighed having your throat sawn through with a knife because it was just that horrific and brutal. But anyway, so the ghost which initially inhabits Sethi's house, in which Paul kind of exercises, is believed to be the spirit of the child that she killed, who is later implied to have been reincarnated in a physical form, and that is the mysterious young woman named Beloved. And again, this is a much more character driven piece than plot driven. The plot is very very slow, and it's just, again, kind of a smoldering affair. But the characters in this book are really well done, and the sense of trauma that each of these characters carries around with them is highly impactful. So both Sethi and Paul uh, are former slaves, and they again have a lot of overlap in their experience because they were, on the same plantation together. But they both carry a lot of baggage due to the experiences they were put through during their time as slaves. Sethi was sexually abused and assaulted and just roundly mistreated. And Paul was also sexually abused and assaulted and roundly mistreated. And it's the depths to which this book goes in portraying these acts of degradation and inhumanity in the minutest detail, which really gives this such life, because this book does not hold anything back, and it is not afraid to go there. I mean, to go to some really dark places. But as I said, this book is one that is concerned with the effects of the past coming back to haunt the present. And again, it works kind of on a literal and metaphorical level. Beloved is both a literal ghost come back to haunt her mother, but also she is kind of representative of the trauma of slavery, how it always lingers with its victims. This is a pretty angry book. There is a righteous indignation that is palpable when reading this, and yeah, this book is just really well written too, because the writing in this book is, it's not, I wouldn't call this kind of stream of consciousness, but it's almost that. It is very fluid chronologically. It weaves back and forth in a very organic and free flowing fashion with the past and the present. And things are revealed and teased out at such a rate that you're always kind of given new developments that add new dimensions to the characters and their circumstances. Toni Morrison really did demonstrate a masterful skill in writing this book. Now, there were some things that I didn't like about it. Mainly, there was a part towards the end of the book where it just switched to just straight up free verse poetry. Basically, it just drops any kind of prose stylings and just becomes something kind of much more loose. And I was just kind of like, you maybe didn't need to do that. You may have went a little bit far because it's only used in like one instance and then it just resumed like it was. So I was kind of like, what's the point with that? Also, there is kind of some uh, there's a bit of a bestiality in this, or discussion of bestiality in this, which I didn't really think that was all that warranted. This book it's pretty grotesque, although with this story it should be, but it did still. There is at least one thing in here where I was like, maybe that didn't need to be in here. But overall, this book was immensely powerful, and again, it oozes a kind of righteous anger, and you can feel the pain of these characters and the scars that they bear because of the just completely inhuman treatment they were subjected to. And it does such a great job of showing what this treatment does to the psyches, to the minds of the people that are subjected to it. Because when you're treated like an animal, I mean, you basically kind of sink to that level. And yeah, this book is brutal. It is grotesque, although it's never gratuitous, and that is a good distinction to make. Is that it never just goes over the top or reaches a point where it just becomes too much. It's always the punches are well timed and they hit all the harder because of that. But now I do think that this book, I said it's a very slow burning book, and it didn't really get really good to me anyway until about 100 pages in. The first 100 pages of this were kind of not all that riveting, but once you get past that mark, or at least once I got past that mark, it really got compelling, and I really had to keep reading to see what came out. And Toni Morrison writes in a very accessible style. Her diction is pretty standard, but she uses a lot of words in very artful ways. That is a really great skill of hers, is that the words, the way that she constructs these sentences, they're using very standard vocabulary and words, but they're put together in such a way that is really striking. And yeah, Beloved really is just a great book. It really is one of probably the a towering achievement of 20th century literature. It's not one of my favorite books, but I wholeheartedly respect Beloved. To rate Beloved, I would give it an A. It is absolutely an A level work. I do not begrudge its adulation in the slightest. And if you are interested in the history of slavery in America and the ramifications of slavery, the lasting effects of it on the minds of the people who had to live through it, definitely pick this up, because this book not only has great literary value, but it also has great historical value too. It does kind of cross over because it's also very concerned with a very sadly real world era that had long lasting effects on entire generations of people. And again, it's just so incisive and just remarkably well done. And yeah, I don't know what else I can say about Beloved. It is a really good book. Toni Morrison was a fantastic writer. I actually have a copy over here of one of her other books, which would be Sula. So I'm kind of interested to see how that will rank up compared to Beloved, because again, Beloved is kind of considered her masterpiece. So maybe I set myself up for kind of a downhill slide by reading the best one, or nominally the best one first, and then reading whatever after. But I'm glad that I read this book. I really am. It is truly an A level book. So, Beloved by Toni Morrison. Have you read Beloved? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I have said about it here today. And if you have not read Beloved, well, I could highly recommend it. It is a masterpiece of a book that demonstrates a great mastery of the craft of writing and character development as well, because this book really does kind of have it all. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button, subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.